the last crust of bread. The rain in Oakhaven didn't wash things clean. It only turned the dust into a thick, suffocating gray mud. Elias sat by his window, watching the water drip through the holes in his thatch roof. On the table sat his entire world, a single, stale heel of rye bread and a cup of water that tasted like rust. His stomach growled, a sharp, twisting pain that felt like a knife. He hadn't eaten a full meal in weeks. The village was dying. The local landlord, a cruel man named Silas, had squeezed every copper and grain of wheat from the people until they were nothing but walking skeletons. A shadow fell across the doorway. Elias looked up. A man stood there, soaked to the bone. His clothes were rags held together by grime, and his eyes were sunken so deep into his skull they looked like holes in a mask.
He didn't speak.
He just held out a trembling, mud-caked hand. "I have nothing," Elias whispered, his voice cracking. "I am dying just like you." The beggar didn't move. A single tear tracked a clean line through the dirt on his cheek. In that moment, Elias didn't see a stranger. He saw his own reflection. He saw the end of all things. If he ate the bread, he would live one more day. If he gave it away, he might die tonight. With a shaking hand, Elias pushed the bread across the table. "Take it," he said. "Let at least one of us forget what it feels like to be hollow." The beggar took the bread. He didn't wolf it down. He broke it in two, bowed his head as if in prayer, and whispered a single sentence that chilled Elias to the bone. "The seeds you plant in the mud will one day grow into a forest that swallows the sun." Before Elias could ask what he meant, the man vanished back into the gray curtain of the rain. The 7 years of ash. Time didn't pass in Oakhaven, it bled. For 7 years, the village became a tomb. The crops failed 3 years in a row. The well went bitter. Elias stayed, not out of loyalty but because he was too weak to run. He watched his neighbors vanish. Some left in the night to find work in the coal mines of the north. Others were carried out in wooden crates, victims of the slow fever that took those who were too hungry to fight back. Silas, the landlord, only grew fatter. He built a stone wall around his manor, and his guards patrolled the streets with iron pikes, ensuring that no one stole the few withered apples that managed to grow in his private orchard. Elias spent his days scavenging for roots. His hands were permanently stained black from the soil. Every night, he thought of the beggar. He wondered if the man had died in the mud a mile down the road. He wondered if his last meal had been a waste of a life. "Why do you stay, Elias?" his neighbor Martha asked one evening as they huddled over a small fire of dried dung. "There is nothing left here but ghosts." "I am waiting for the forest," Elias muttered, his mind wandering back to the beggar's strange words. Martha laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "There are no forests here, Elias. Only the gallows and the tax collector." That night, Elias dreamed of gold. Not the gold of coins, but a gold so bright it burned. He saw a man walking toward Oakhaven, and with every step the man took, the mud turned into silk and the stones turned into bread. But when the man reached the village gates, he didn't smile. He carried a heavy iron key, and he looked like a man who had come to collect a very old debt. The black carriage. The 7th year ended with a winter so cold the crows froze in the trees. On the first day of spring, when the ice began to crack, a sound echoed through the valley that no one had heard in a generation, the sound of many horses. It wasn't the clatter of the landlord's tired ponies. It was a heavy, rhythmic thundering. The villagers crawled out of their hovels, squinting against the pale sun. Coming down the main road was a procession of black carriages, their wheels tipped in silver. Dozens of guards in charcoal gray uniforms rode on stallions that looked better fed than the entire village combined. The lead carriage stopped in the center of the mud-slicked square, right in front of Elias's crumbling shack. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He wore a coat of heavy black wool with a collar of dark fur. His boots were polished to a mirror shine, and a gold chain hung across his vest. But it was his face that stopped the hearts of everyone watching. He looked like a king, but he had the eyes of a man who had seen the bottom of a grave. Silas, the landlord, came running out of his manor, tucking his shirt into his pants, his face pale with fear. "My lord, we weren't expecting a visitor of your stature. Who are you? What is your business in this wretched place?" The man ignored Silas. He turned his gaze toward Elias, who stood shivering in his doorway, his ribs visible through his tattered tunic. 7 years ago, the man said, his voice deep and smooth as velvet, I was given a piece of rye bread in this square. It was the only thing standing between me and the silence. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dried crust of bread, blackened with age, but kept like a holy relic. My name is Malachi, the man said, and I have come to buy this village. All of it. The land, the houses, and the souls of every man who stood by and watched it rot. Would you like me to continue with chapters 4, 5, and 6 to see what Malachi does to the cruel landlord and how he begins to repay the village? The square of Oakhaven fell into a silence, so profound it felt as though the wind itself had stopped breathing. Silas, the landlord, stood frozen, his mouth agape like a landed fish. He looked at the black carriages, then at the beggar turnking, then finally at Elias, the most broken man in the valley. The bill of sale. Malachi stepped forward, his boots crunching on the frozen mud. He didn't look at the starving peasants. He looked at the stone manor of Silas. With a flick of his wrist, one of his guards stepped forward, carrying a heavy leather satchel. I have already spoken to the high magistrate in the capital, Malachi said, his voice cold as a winter stream. The deeds to this valley have been forfeited due to unpaid crown debts and gross negligence. I have paid them in full. Silas began to tremble. You can't. This is my family's land. You can't just buy a village. I am not buying a village, Malachi replied, turning to face the landlord. I am buying a debt. For 7 years, you fed on the marrow of these people. For 7 years, you watched them die so you could keep your wine cellar full. Malachi signaled to his guards. They didn't draw swords, they drew scrolls. They began to read aloud the names of everyone who had died in Oakhaven since the night Malachi had been fed. With every name, Silas grew smaller, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. You are now a tenant on my land, Silas, Malachi whispered, and your rent is due. The Banquet of Shadows. That evening, the center of the village was transformed. Long wooden tables were hauled from the carriages. Great fires were lit, and the scent of roasting meat, real meat, seasoned with salt and herbs, filled the air. It was a scent most children in the village had never known.
But the atmosphere wasn't one of celebration. It was heavy with a strange, dark tension. Malachi sat at the head of the table, but he didn't eat. He watched. Sit, Elias, Malachi commanded, gesturing to the seat at his right hand. Elias sat, his hands shaking so violently he had to hide them beneath the table. He looked at the feast, heaps of potatoes, steaming bread, and thick stews. His stomach roared, but he felt a cold knot of dread. Why me? Elias whispered. I only gave you a crust. It wasn't worth all of this. It was the only thing you had, Malachi said. A king giving gold is an investment. A starving man giving his last meal is a sacrifice. The world is built on investments, Elias, but it is saved by sacrifices. Across the table, Silas was forced to sit in a chair made of jagged pine. He wasn't served meat. In front of him sat a single moldy crust of bread and a cup of muddy water. Eat, Silas, Malachi said, his eyes glowing in the firelight. Eat until you understand what my friend Elias felt for 7 long years. The reconstruction of souls. The next morning, the work began. But Malachi didn't hire outside contractors. He threw bags of silver into the mud at the feet of the villagers. You will rebuild Oakhaven, Malachi announced. But you will not build for Silas. You will build for yourselves. Every stone you lay, every beam you raise, belongs to you. But there is a price. The villagers looked at the silver, then at each other. They were weak, their spirits crushed by years of abuse. The price, Malachi continued, is that you must tell me the truth. Every day, one of you will come to the manor and tell me a secret about what happened here while I was gone. I want to know who stole from their neighbor. I want to know who turned a blind eye to a dying child. I want to know the cost of your survival." Elias realized then that Malachi hadn't come to bring peace. He had come to perform surgery on the village's soul. He was going to cut out the rot, and surgery always required blood. The confessionals. One by one, the villagers entered the manor. They went in looking like men and came out looking like ghosts. The silver was helping them eat, but the confessions were hollowing them out. Martha, Elias's neighbor, came to him crying one afternoon. "He knows, Elias. He knows I stole the grain from old man Thomas before he passed. He didn't punish me. He made me look at the grain until I vomited." Elias began to fear Malachi. The man who had been a beggar was now a god of judgment. He wasn't just buying the village, he was buying their sins. "Is this what you wanted?" Elias asked Malachi one night in the library of the manor. "To make them suffer for staying alive?" "I want them to be worthy of the forest," Malachi said, looking out at the new trees being planted in the square. "You cannot grow something beautiful in soil that is full of poison. I am merely turning the earth." The landlord's penance. Silas was not allowed to leave. He was stripped of his fine clothes and forced to work in the fields alongside the men he had once whipped. His hands, once soft and white, became blistered and raw. Every night, Silas was brought before Malachi. "How does the dirt taste, Silas?" Malachi would ask. "Please," Silas would beg. "I have money hidden. In the north. Take it all. Just let me go." "I don't want your money," Malachi said. "I have all the money in the world. I want your time. I want the 7 years you stole from Elias. You will give them back, second by agonizing second." The darkness in Malachi was becoming clearer to Elias. The karma wasn't just a reward for the good, it was a slow-motion execution for the wicked. The ghost in the gold. As Oakhaven grew beautiful, with painted houses and golden fields of wheat, the people grew more terrified. They had everything they ever wanted: food, warmth, security. But they lived in a shadow. Malachi never smiled. He paced the halls of the manor at night, the sound of his boots echoing like a ticking clock. Elias found him in the garden, staring at a small patch of rye. "You're not happy, are you?" Elias asked. Malachi turned. For a moment, the mask of the great lord slipped, and Elias saw the beggar again, the man who was so hungry he had forgotten his own name. "When you have nothing, you have hope," Malachi whispered. "When you have everything, you only have the past. I bought this village to find the man I was when you fed me. But that man died in the rain, Elias. All that's left is this ghost in a black coat. The first betrayal." Wealth brought out a new kind of darkness in Oakhaven. Now that the people were no longer starving, they began to crave more. A group of villagers, led by a man named Beggar who had grown fat on Malachi's silver, approached Elias in secret. "He's a tyrant, Elias," Beggar whispered. "He watches us. He judges us. He's no better than Silas, just richer. We have enough now. We don't need him. If something happened to him, the land would be ours. The deeds are in his study." Elias felt a cold shiver. "He saved you. He fed you. He bought us," Beggar spat. "There's a difference." Elias realized that the karma was coming full circle. The village Malachi had saved was now conspiring to kill him. The night of the long knives. Elias stood in the shadows of the manor hallway as Beggar and 3 others crept toward Malachi's bedroom, their knives gleaming in the moonlight. Elias had a choice. He could let them do it. He could be free of the dark atmosphere, the judgment, and the chilling presence of his old friend. He could live his life in the new, wealthy Oakhaven. But he remembered the tear on the beggar's cheek 7 years ago. "Stop!" Elias screamed, stepping into the light. The assassins froze. From the darkness of the bedroom, Malachi stepped out. He wasn't wearing his nightgown. He was in full dress, his gold chain glinting. He had been waiting. "I wondered how long it would take," Malachi said, his voice almost disappointed. 7 years of hunger didn't break you, but 2 years of comfort made you murderers. The price of treason. Malachi didn't call the guards. He didn't need to. He simply looked at the men, and they fell to their knees, the knives dropping from their nerveless fingers. "I am not Silas," Malachi said. "I won't whip you. I won't tax you. I will simply take back what is mine." With a wave of his hand, his servants began to carry the furniture out of Gregor's house. They took the grain from his silo. They took the shingles from his roof. By dawn, Gregor's family was standing in the mud, exactly as they had been 7 years ago. "You are the first to be returned to the earth," Malachi told the village. "Who is next?" The terror was now complete. Malachi wasn't a savior. He was a gardener who didn't mind pulling up the flowers along with the weeds. The hunger returns. The village began to divide. Fear turned neighbor against neighbor. People started reporting each other to Malachi for the smallest infractions, hoping to stay in his good graces. Elias watched as Oakhaven became a gilded cage. The karma had become a curse. The people were well fed, but they were slaves to their own paranoia. "You're destroying them," Elias told Malachi. "I am showing them who they are," Malachi replied. "They were only good when they were too weak to be bad. That is not virtue, Elias. That is just lack of opportunity." Elias realized that Malachi's last meal hadn't just saved his life, it had given him the power to play God, and no man is meant to hold that much light. This is a chilling evolution of Malachi's character. He has transitioned from a tragic hero into a cynical philosopher king, using the villagers' own greed and fear as a mirror to justify his tyranny. He isn't just punishing them, he's conducting a dark social experiment. To expand on this tension, we can focus on the purity tests neighbors are forcing upon one another and the physical manifestation of Malachi's God complex. The gilded decay of Oakhaven. The air in the village had changed. It no longer smelled of wood smoke and damp earth, but of the metallic tang of gold and the sour sweat of anxiety. Doors that were once left unlatched were now bolted with heavy iron, and every conversation in the market was a performance, a desperate display of virtue meant to be overheard by Malachi's shadows. The trial of the trivial. The reports began as whispers and grew into formal accusations. Elias watched from the square as a woman he'd known for years, a healer who once shared her last loaf, pointed a trembling finger at her cousin. The accusation: he kept a silver coin for himself. He didn't offer it to the altar of thanks. The reaction: the cousin didn't defend himself, he wept and knelt, begging Malachi for the opportunity to be better. The sentence: Malachi didn't strike him. He simply watched with a terrifying, detached curiosity, his silence more crushing than any whip. The philosophy of the cage. Elias found Malachi standing atop the stone altar, looking down at the village like a man watching an anthill. The iron key hung around Malachi's neck, glowing with a faint, sickly luminescence. "You're destroying them," Elias said, his voice thick with a mix of grief and horror. "You've turned their sanctuary into a panopticon." Malachi didn't turn around. He merely gestured to the well-dressed, starving-eyed people below. "I am showing them who they are, Elias. They were only good when they were too weak to be bad. That is not virtue, that is just a lack of opportunity. Hunger makes men desperate, but abundance? Abundance makes them monsters. I am simply the one who handed them the teeth." The blinding light. Elias saw the truth then. Malachi's last meal hadn't just sustained his body, it had inflated his soul until it crowded out his humanity. He was no longer a man who had been saved. He was a man who believed he was the source of salvation. He was holding so much light, the power of life, death, and debt, that it was beginning to burn everyone he touched. The turning point. Malachi's logic is a trap. If people are only good when they are poor, then he must keep them wealthy and fearful to prove they are inherently evil. The landlord's last breath. Silas died in the fields. Not from a beating, but from a broken heart and a body that had forgotten how to work. Malachi buried him in an unmarked grave at the edge of the woods. He made the entire village attend the funeral. "He was the man you hated," Malachi said over the grave. "But he was the man you all tried to become the moment I gave you silver. You didn't want a better world. You just wanted to be the ones holding the whip." Elias looked at the faces of his neighbors. They didn't look like victims anymore. They looked like reflections of Silas. The secret of the black carriage. Elias decided to find out where Malachi's wealth had truly come from. He broke into the study and searched the ledgers. He didn't find gold mines or royal inheritances. He found names. Thousands of names. Malachi hadn't become a merchant. He had become a debt collector for a secret society of the drowned, men who had lost everything and clawed their way back through blood and betrayal. The whole village wasn't bought with silver. It was bought with a contract that placed the souls of the inhabitants into the hands of a dark brotherhood. "You found it," Malachi said, standing in the doorway. "You sold yourself to buy us," Elias whispered. "I had to," Malachi said. "The world doesn't give you a kingdom for a piece of bread, Elias. It gives you a kingdom for your humanity." The final winter. A new winter arrived, fiercer than the one 7 years ago. But this time, the silos were full. The houses were strong. Yet, the people were dying of a wasting sickness of the mind. They sat in their warm houses, staring at the walls, terrified to speak. Elias saw the forest Malachi had promised. It was a forest of iron trees, cold and unyielding. "It's time to finish it," Malachi said to Elias. "The 7 years are over." The auction of souls. Malachi called the village to the square. He held a giant iron key in his hand. "I am leaving," he announced. "But I cannot take the village with me. I am putting it up for auction. But you will not bid with money." The villagers looked up, a spark of hope in their hollow eyes. "You will bid with your memories," Malachi said. "The one who can give me the most painful memory of their life will win the deed to their house. The one who can give me their most precious memory will win the manor." One by one, the people began to trade their lives for their property. They gave away the memories of their mothers, their first loves, their children's laughter. They became empty husks, standing in beautiful houses they no longer remembered how to love. Elias's turn. Elias stood before Malachi. The village was now a place of empty men. They had their wealth, but they were shadows. "What will you bid, Elias?" Malachi asked. "I bid the memory of the bread," Elias said. "The night I fed you. I want to forget it." Malachi flinched as if he had been struck. "That is the only thing keeping me human, Elias. If you give that away, I am nothing but a demon." "Then be a demon," Elias spat. "Because the man you've become is a monster to the man you were." The breaking of the key. Malachi looked at the iron key. He looked at the village he had saved. He saw the empty, wealthy shells of the people. He saw the gold that had brought only darkness. With a roar of agony, Malachi struck the key against the stone altar in the square. It didn't break. He struck it again and again until his hands bled. "It won't break," Malachi screamed. "The debt is too heavy." Elias realized that karma wasn't a loop, it was a cage. Malachi was trapped by his own gratitude. The weight of the iron key. The square, once the heart of the community, now felt like a mausoleum of excess. The villagers stood in the shadows of their doorways, gaunt figures draped in heavy silks, their eyes reflecting the cold, hard glint of the gold coins they clutched like rosary beads. They didn't cheer for Malachi. They didn't even look at him. They only looked at the key. The altar of debt. Malachi's breath came in ragged, sobbing hitches. Every strike against the stone sent a jar of vibration up his arms, rattling his teeth. The first strike, a spark flew, but the iron remained pristine. The 10th strike, the skin across his knuckles split, painting the black metal with a slick, crimson hue. The final strike, a sound like a tolling funeral bell echoed through the square, but the key didn't even bend. "It won't break," Malachi screamed, his voice cracking against the silence of the onlookers. "The debt is too heavy." The revelation of the cage. Elias watched from the periphery, the cold realization settling in his gut like lead. He had always thought of karma as a cosmic balance, a wheel that eventually turned toward justice. He was wrong. "Karma isn't a ledger," Elias whispered to the wind. "It's a tether." He saw it now. The gratitude Malachi felt wasn't a choice. It was a biological imperative written into the iron of that key. By saving the village, Malachi hadn't freed them. He had simply bought them. He was now the master of a plantation of ghosts, and the key was the lock on his own neck. He couldn't leave because he owed them his life, and they couldn't live because they owed him their souls. The cage is now physical and spiritual. Malachi is trapped in a loop of trying to destroy the very thing that defines him. The fire of Oakhaven. Elias took a torch and walked to the manor. He didn't do it out of hate. He did it out of mercy. He set the curtains ablaze. He watched as the silver-tipped carriages were consumed by the flames. The villagers stood by and watched, their empty eyes reflecting the fire. They didn't try to save the wealth. Without their memories, the gold meant nothing. Malachi stood in the center of the burning square, laughing. Finally, the light is back. The return of the beggar. By morning, Oakhaven was a ruin once more. The houses were charred skeletons. The silver was melted into puddles in the mud. The empty men wandered away, heading into the world to find new memories to fill the holes in their heads. Elias sat by the riverbank. Beside him sat a man in rags. His fur coat was gone. His gold chain was melted. His boots were gone. "I have nothing," Malachi whispered. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, hard crust of bread he had saved from the night before. "Take it," Elias said. 7 years later, it's all we ever really had." Malachi took the bread, broke it in two, and shared it with Elias. They sat in the mud, two beggars in a ruined world, finally free of the debt of being saved. Success is a hollow victory if it is built on the destruction of the soul. Karma is not a bank account, it is a mirror. What you give comes back, but sometimes it comes back with a weight you were never meant to carry.